What happens when a proud Texas rancher finally gets pushed too far? One HOA board member thought she could bulldoze through his land, until his hidden trap turned the tables. Roland Keaton had lived his whole life on that land in Weatherford, Texas. His ranch wasn't just property. It was blood, sweat, and years of hard work passed down from his father and grandfather. That's why every time his gate got shoved open and his dirt road torn up by the same silver SUV, it burned deeper than most folks could imagine. And the worst part? He knew exactly who was behind the wheel. Judith Cranford, 52 years old, an HOA board member from that freshly built subdivision down the road where every house looked the same. To her, Roland's ranch was nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle standing between her and the highway. To him, it was sacred ground. And every time she forced her way through that gate, it wasn't just trespassing. It was disrespect. The first time Roland caught her, he was out fixing a water trough in the back pasture. He heard gravel crunching where no gravel should have been, and when he came around the barn, there she was, her Lexus creeping past like it belonged there. He flagged her down. "Ma'am, this here's private land," Roland said, tipping his hat out of habit more than politeness. Judith rolled her window down just enough to talk, her sunglasses reflecting back the sun. "I know, Roland. I'm just cutting through. Saves me 15 minutes and it doesn't hurt anybody." Roland clenched his jaw. "It hurts me. This road wasn't built for your car. It's mine, and I don't want folks running through it." Judith's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a road." Then she eased the SUV forward, leaving Roland coughing in her dust. That moment stuck. It wasn't the trespass itself that rattled him most. It was the way she looked at him, like he was some stubborn old man clinging to rules nobody cared about anymore. Over the next few weeks, the problem only got worse. Roland found tire tracks across his pasture road nearly every other day. Sometimes, when he fixed the gate, he'd find it bent or forced open the very next morning. He replaced the latch twice, welded new hinges, even added a heavy padlock. Nothing stopped her. He tried reasoning. He printed notices and left them on her windshield at the subdivision parking lot. He showed her the Texas property law codes, highlighted and underlined, but Judith barely read them before tossing them aside. He even sent an email to the HOA board with drone footage of her car driving through his land, kicking up dust. The reply he got back was almost insulting. "The board has reviewed your complaint and finds no action necessary at this time." It was like shouting into the wind. Judith had influence. And Roland? He was just the rancher down the road. Things reached a breaking point one afternoon at the Weatherford feed store. Roland was buying cattle cubes when he overheard Judith's voice from 2 aisles over. "He's wasting his time," she said loudly to another neighbor. "That old man thinks a gate is going to stop me. Please, I've been driving through there for months. What's he going to do? Chase me down on horseback?" The neighbor chuckled awkwardly, and Roland's chest tightened. That wasn't just trespassing anymore. That was bragging. Public humiliation. When he confronted her outside the store, Judith didn't back down. "You think people around here respect you for guarding a pile of dirt and barbed wire?" she asked, tilting her head. "You should be grateful someone even wants to drive through this place. Half the time, it looks abandoned." Roland's face heated. "You've got some nerve. This land fed my family for 3 generations. You treat it like a shortcut, but it's my home." Judith smirked, climbed into her SUV, and without another word, drove off. That night, Roland sat on his porch, staring out at the gate under the glow of the porch light. His hands were calloused, his back ached, but what weighed heavier than anything was the thought of his father, the man who had built that very fence with his bare hands. If he could see it now, strangers tearing through like it was nothing, what would he say? Roland tapped his boot against the wooden porch boards, the anger rising in his chest like fire. He had tried letters. He had tried reason. He had tried patience, but none of it mattered. Judith Cranford wasn't listening. But when someone refuses to hear words, sometimes the only language left is action. The next morning, Roland decided he wasn't going to let Judith keep thinking she could walk all over him. He saddled up his old pickup, the one his dad had passed down, and drove straight over to the subdivision where she lived. It was early, just after sunrise, and sprinklers were spitting water over identical front lawns. Every driveway gleamed with polished SUVs and freshly washed sedans. The place looked like it had been stamped out of a mold, and Roland felt out of place with his dusty boots and truck coated in ranch dirt. He parked a few houses down and waited. Sure enough, Judith's silver Lexus backed out right on schedule. She eased onto the street, sunglasses on even though the sun had barely crested the rooftops. Roland pulled forward and blocked her path before she could leave the neighborhood. Judith rolled her window down halfway, annoyance painted across her face. "Roland, what on earth are you doing here?" He leaned out the window. "We need to talk. Not out on my land, right here, where your neighbors can hear if they care to." Her lips tightened. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm not the one breaking the law," he fired back. "Judith, I've asked you, I've shown you proof, I've even taken it to your HOA. Still, you keep cutting through my ranch." "Why?" She laughed softly, like he'd asked the most ridiculous question. "Because it's faster. And because nothing you do is going to stop me." Roland's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "You think this is a game, but this is my land. It's not up for debate. You can drive the extra 15 minutes like everybody else." Her eyes flicked past him, noticing a couple walking their dog down the sidewalk, watching the exchange. Judith leaned back in her seat, voice smooth and practiced. "Roland, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. People are already saying you're unstable. You want to be remembered as the angry old rancher screaming about tire tracks?" Roland's jaw worked, but he kept his voice steady. "No, I want to be remembered as the man who stood his ground." Judith held his stare for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Good luck with that." She put the car in reverse, swung around his truck, and drove off without another word. Later that week, Roland spotted her again. Same silver SUV, same dirt road, same smug attitude. He walked out from the barn, waving both arms. She slowed just enough to roll her window down. "I told you to stop," he said firmly. "And I told you I'm not hurting anything," she replied, smirking. "You're tearing up the road. My cattle spook when you speed through. You break that gate one more time, and I'm sending the bill to you." Judith tilted her head. "Send whatever bill you want. My HOA will laugh it off. Do you really think anyone's going to take your side against me?" Roland stepped closer, close enough to see his own reflection in her glasses. "Lady, one day you're going to push too far," she chuckled, pressed the gas, and the Lexus lurched forward, spraying gravel at his boots as she disappeared down the path. That night, Roland typed out another email. He attached fresh drone footage, detailed the damage to the gate, and explained the livestock safety risk. His words were blunt. "If this continues, I'll be forced to take measures to protect my property." The response came back 2 days later. "The board acknowledges your concerns but maintains that this is a private dispute between neighbors. The HOA will not be intervening." Roland sat back in his chair, staring at the screen. He could almost hear Judith laughing as she read it too. To her, it was confirmation that she had the upper hand. At church that Sunday, an old friend pulled him aside. "Roland, I heard Judith talking at the gas station. She says you're chasing her down like a madman. Folks are starting to wonder if you're losing it." Roland swallowed hard. "She's turning this around, making me the villain," his friend sighed. "I know, but she's got connections. You don't." Roland shook his head. "Doesn't matter. My land is my land. I won't let her keep walking over me." He left service that day with more weight on his shoulders than he'd brought in. Everywhere he turned, Judith was spreading her version of the story, and every time he looked out at his gate, bent just a little more, scarred from being rammed open, the anger pressed deeper into his bones. But Roland still thought there might be one last chance to stop her before things went too far. By the time May rolled around, the road through Roland's pasture didn't look like his road anymore. Deep ruts carved into the dirt where her tires passed again and again, a trail of dust marking every shortcut she took. He could tell which days she'd been through just by the way the ground looked, by the way his cattle lingered further from the gate, spooked by the noise of an engine that didn't belong. Roland had tried everything short of calling the sheriff. He'd even sat out by the gate with his thermos of coffee, waiting for her, hoping she'd stop and see him sitting there like a guard dog. She never slowed. If anything, she sped up, throwing gravel behind her tires like a taunt. One Friday morning, after finding the gate latch ripped clean off again, Roland drove into town for supplies. At the Weatherford diner, where farmers and ranchers gathered for breakfast, he slid into a booth with his friend Eddie Burleson. Eddie was the kind of man who listened more than he talked, but today he leaned forward, eyes narrow. "Roland, you know she's telling people you threatened her, right?" Roland set down his coffee cup with a hard clink. "Threatened her? I told her to quit trespassing." "That's the truth," Eddie shook his head. "She's saying you stood in front of her car, yelling, waving your arms like you were about to drag her out. Folks are repeating it like gospel." Roland's chest tightened. "She's twisting it. I didn't touch her car. Didn't lay a hand on her." From the counter, another rancher piped up, half under his breath but loud enough for Roland to hear. "Careful, Keaton. HOA folks don't play fair. You're picking a fight you can't win." The words stung. Roland had spent decades earning respect in that community, only for it to slip through his fingers because one woman couldn't respect a boundary. When he left the diner, he noticed something in town he hadn't seen before. People glancing his way, whispering. He knew that look. Rumors were spreading faster than truth. That evening, he walked the length of his pasture fence, thinking. The sun bled orange across the horizon, and cicadas screamed from the trees. Every sound reminded him how alive the land was, how much it meant to him. His grandfather had fenced that first boundary with little more than sweat and stubbornness. Now a woman with a luxury car and an HOA title thought she could plow through it like it was nothing. Roland muttered to himself. Not anymore. 2 days later, Judith came again. He knew the sound of her engine by now, a low growl that didn't belong on ranch roads. He stepped out as her SUV approached, arms crossed. "Judith," he called, standing firm in the center of the road. She braked, then rolled the window down with a sigh. "Really, Roland? Again with this performance?" "You call it performance. I call it standing where I belong," he said flatly. She smirked. "Look, I don't know why this bothers you so much. It's just a road. You've got acres of land, cows wandering everywhere, and you're worried about me saving a few minutes?" Roland took a step closer, his voice steady. "Because if I let you walk over me, then anybody thinks they can. You understand that?" Her laugh was sharp. "You sound like some cowboy from a bad movie. Nobody cares about your dirt road, Roland. Nobody but you." He leaned in just enough so she couldn't mistake the weight of his words. "And that's all that matters. It's mine, and I won't let you keep tearing it up." She rolled her eyes, put the car back in gear, and pressed forward. This time, Roland had to step aside or be hit. Dust filled his lungs as she roared past, her SUV bouncing down the rutted road like she owned it. Later that night, Roland sat at his kitchen table, papers scattered in front of him. Every incident, every photo, every clip of drone footage. He'd been documenting everything. He thought about marching it all to the sheriff's office, but something in his gut told him it would fall flat. Judith's influence ran deeper than he wanted to admit. The next week, word spread even further. A neighbor stopped Roland at the feed store. "Judith says you're obsessed with her, that you sit out waiting for her car like some kind of stalker. Is that true?" Roland's hands tightened around the bag of seed he was holding. "No, that's her story, not mine. I sit out waiting because she keeps breaking my gate. That's all," the neighbor shrugged. "People are starting to wonder, is all." By the time Roland got back to the ranch, he felt the shift in the air. His reputation wasn't just at stake. It was being chipped away piece by piece. Judith wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was dragging his name through the mud. Standing by the gate, Roland touched the twisted latch one more time. The anger wasn't just simmering anymore. It was boiling over. But anger alone wouldn't fix this. Roland knew he had to take the next step, one she would never see coming. The Texas heat beat down hard that week, the kind that dried sweat before it could even run. Roland stood at his gate, staring at the twisted hinge Judith had shoved through again. He had fixed it 3 times in as many weeks, and each time her SUV had come back like clockwork. He kicked the dirt, frustration burning hot in his chest. "Enough's enough," he muttered, voice low but steady. That night, sitting at his kitchen table with the old lamp flickering above, Roland spread out photographs of the damage. He laid them in a row like evidence on a lawyer's desk. Bent hinges, broken latches, tire ruts gouging the road deeper and deeper. Every image was a reminder of how little his words had mattered. His hands trembled as he held a picture of his father standing at that same gate 30 years earlier, proud, smiling, his arm slung around Roland's shoulder. That fence had been built with his father's sweat. Now, a woman who had lived down the road for barely a decade thought she could tear it apart like it was nothing. Roland whispered into the silence. "I won't let her erase what he built." The next day, he tried one more time to reason with her. He waited by the road until her SUV came rolling up, sun glinting off the polished hood. He stepped into her path and raised his hand. Judith braked reluctantly, rolling the window down with that same expression, half smug, half bored. "What is it now, Roland? Another lecture?" He leaned in slightly, voice firm but calm. "I'm not asking any more. I'm telling you, stay off my land." She laughed, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? You can fix that gate 100 times and I'll still get through. It's faster, it's easier, and no one cares but you. Why waste your energy?" Roland's teeth clenched. "Because this land matters. My family built it, and I won't stand by while you tear it apart." Her smile widened. "Then maybe you should sell." "Sounds like too much trouble for you." Roland's eyes hardened. "I'll never sell." She leaned back, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. "Suit yourself." Then she hit the gas, forcing the gate open once more. Roland stood there, dust swirling around him, the echo of her engine fading into the distance. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the rage boiling inside. That evening, he drove into Weatherford and stopped at a feed store where an old ranch buddy, Tom Granger, was stacking bags of grain. Roland pulled him aside. "Tom," he said quietly, "what would you do if someone kept tearing through your land?" Same person. Over and over. "No respect for anything you said?" Tom scratched his beard. "I'd call the sheriff, I reckon. I thought about it, but she's got folks on her side. They'd turn it into me harassing her." Tom frowned. "Then you build something she can't push through. You make it hurt her wallet to even try." Those words stuck. That night, Roland sat on the porch long after the sun went down, the air thick with the smell of mesquite smoke. He stared at the gate under the pale moonlight, thinking about all the times it had been pushed, bent, broken. He thought about his father's voice telling him to protect what's his. He thought about Judith's smirk at the rodeo, the way people laughed behind his back. The anger in his chest settled into something sharper, colder. "Resolve." Roland stood, went inside, and pulled out a notebook. He began sketching. Reinforced steel beams for the gate, hidden supports that couldn't be rammed loose. And something else. A line of tire spikes, disguised beneath gravel, invisible until it was too late. As the pencil scratched across the page, his hand steadied. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was planning. By dawn, the decision was made. He would protect his land in a way she couldn't laugh off. He would build something that spoke louder than all the words she had ignored. The next morning, Roland drove into Fort Worth again, this time with a list of supplies that looked more like construction gear than ranch upkeep. Steel rods, heavy hinges, reinforced bolts, and a special order item he had researched the night before, retractable tire spikes, the kind used in parking garages and restricted lots. When the cashier raised an eyebrow, Roland just said, "Fixing a problem." Back at the ranch, he unloaded the truck piece by piece, setting the supplies in neat rows near the barn. He stood there for a long moment, wiping the sweat from his brow, staring at the gate in the distance. This wasn't about revenge. Not to him. It was about respect, about teaching a lesson that words had failed to teach. But deep down, Roland knew once he built it, there'd be no going back, and part of him welcomed that. The summer sun was merciless, but Roland hardly noticed. Sweat poured down his back as he worked, yet he moved with the kind of steady focus that only comes when a man's patience has finally run out. The gate had been patched for the last time. This time, it was being rebuilt. He started with the steel beams, measuring and cutting them with a precision his father would have admired. Sparks flew from the grinder, lighting up the barn like fireflies. He welded the frame solid, embedding it into concrete footings that went deeper than any ordinary ranch gate needed. This wasn't just for cattle. This was for someone who thought rules didn't apply to her. As he worked, he thought about all the conversations he'd had with Judith. Every dismissive smirk, every laugh, every time she brushed him off like he was the nuisance instead of her. The anger fueled him, but underneath it was something heavier, a deep sense of betrayal. She hadn't just ignored him. She'd made him into the town fool. 2 days later, the gate stood taller, heavier, and stronger than before. But the real piece of work was hidden just behind it. Roland had laid down a trench across the road, filled it with a line of retractable tire spikes. Each spike was reinforced steel, sharp enough to cut through thick rubber. He covered them with a thin layer of gravel, spreading it carefully until the ground looked no different from the rest of the road. When he finished, he stood back and stared. To the naked eye, it was just a dirt path. Only Roland knew the danger that lay beneath. That evening, his friend Eddie stopped by to drop off a spare part for the tractor. Eddie leaned against his truck, squinting at the new gate. "Looks like you went all out," Eddie said. Roland wiped the sweat from his brow. "Had to. She keeps breaking it. This one she won't push through so easy." Eddie nodded, then lowered his voice. "What else did you do?" Roland hesitated, then shrugged. "Let's just say if she tries again, she won't be driving far." Eddie frowned. "You're playing with fire, Roland. If something happens to her..." "She's been warned," Roland cut in. "Over and over. I'm not setting out to hurt her, just her car. Make her think twice before she treats my land like a shortcut." Eddie studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Just be careful. Folks around here already think you're the problem." Roland's jaw tightened. "They'll see the truth soon enough." For the next few days, Roland kept a watchful eye from his porch. The new gate gleamed in the sun, solid and imposing. He knew it wouldn't take long before Judith tried again. She was too stubborn, too proud to let it go, and he was right. On the 4th day, just before dusk, he heard it, the low growl of her Lexus engine coming down the road. His pulse quickened. He stood, set his coffee aside, and leaned on the porch railing, watching. Her SUV slowed at the gate, like always. She nudged the bumper forward, pressing against the steel. Only this time, the gate didn't give. She backed up, hit it harder, the sound echoing across the pasture. Still, it held. Roland's lips pressed into a thin line. She wasn't going to stop. He could see it in the way the vehicle revved, the way she jerked the wheel, determined to force her way through. Finally, the gate creaked open just enough for her to push past. Her SUV rolled forward, tires crunching over the gravel covering the trap. Roland held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the hiss. A sharp, violent sound followed by the thud of rubber tearing apart. One tire, then another. Within seconds, all 4 had blown, the Lexus sinking on its rims like a wounded animal. The sound echoed across the field. Dust swirled around the crippled vehicle as Judith slammed the brakes, shock painted on her face. Roland stepped down from the porch slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt. He didn't hurry. He didn't need to. She wasn't going anywhere now. Judith threw open her door, standing beside the car in disbelief. "What did you do?" she shouted, her voice breaking. Roland's voice was calm, steady. "I told you this road wasn't yours to take. You didn't listen." Her eyes were wide, her face pale under the setting sun. "You can't do this. This is illegal." He stopped a few feet from her, hands at his sides. "Illegal is trespassing on land that isn't yours. Legal is breaking someone's gate, over and over. I tried letters. I tried talking. You wouldn't stop, so now you're stopped." For the first time, Judith didn't have a quick comeback. She looked down at her ruined car, then back at Roland. The bravado was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. But Roland knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of the storm that was about to follow. Judith's Lexus sat crippled at the edge of Roland's property like a monument to stubborn pride. The tires were shredded down to the rims, hissing and sagging, the gravel littered with strips of rubber. Roland stood there in the fading daylight, watching Judith pace in the dirt beside her ruined SUV. Her voice cut through the stillness. "You'll regret this, Roland. Do you hear me? I'll have your ranch in court so fast, you won't know what hit you." Roland didn't flinch. His face was steady, calm. "You trespassed, Judith, over and over. Now you've got proof of what happens when you ignore boundaries." Judith's eyes flashed. "Boundaries? Don't play righteous with me. This is harassment." Roland stepped closer, lowering his voice. "No. This is consequence, something you've avoided for too long." The tension hung in the air as the cicadas droned from the trees. Judith finally pulled out her phone, dialing with trembling fingers. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer," she spat. Then she turned away, refusing to look at him. Roland left her standing there, walking back to his porch without another word. He knew better than to get into a shouting match, not when she thrived on making him look like the villain. By the time a tow truck arrived, night had fully set in. Roland watched from his porch light as the driver winched her luxury SUV up onto the flatbed. Judith stood off to the side, arms crossed, her expression cold as stone. She never looked his way again that night, but Roland knew this wasn't finished. If anything, the real fight was about to start. The following morning, he drove into town for coffee. The diner was buzzing with chatter, not the kind of buzz that came from the usual rodeo talk, but sharp whispers that quieted when he walked in. He slid onto a stool at the counter, ordered his coffee, and kept his gaze fixed ahead. From a booth nearby, he overheard someone mutter, "That's the guy who laid spikes under his gate." Took out her tires, all four. Another voice chimed in. "She says it was intentional. Dangerous. What if someone else drove through?" Roland sipped his coffee, ignoring the sideways glances. The story was out, and like always, Judith had made sure her version came first. Later that day, he got a knock on his door. It was Deputy Sheriff Mark Rowden, a tall man with a weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Roland," the deputy said, tipping his hat slightly. "We got a complaint. Says you set up some kind of trap at your gate." Roland crossed his arms. "She left out the part where she's been trespassing for months, breaking my gate every chance she gets." Rowden sighed. "I'm not here to pick sides. Just here to hear both stories. She's saying it was dangerous, reckless. You saying it's your property, your right, it is my right," Roland said firmly. "I built that gate, paid for that road. She had no business driving through. She ignored every warning. I didn't touch her, didn't touch her car. She destroyed it herself by forcing her way through." The deputy scratched his chin. "I hear you, but be careful. She's not backing down. And with her HOA friends, she's got folks who'll listen." Roland gave a short nod. "I've lived here my whole life. Folks know me. They know this land. I'm not the one lying." Rowden looked him over, then said quietly, "Truth don't always win in a fight like this. Watch your back." With that, he turned and left. As the days went by, Judith made sure the incident was the talk of town. She called meetings, rallied her HOA board, and painted Roland as a bitter old man who had gone too far. She told anyone who'd listen that she feared for her safety, that Roland was unhinged and dangerous. Roland's friends tried to reassure him. Eddie dropped by one evening and said, "Don't let her break you down. You did what you had to." Roland shook his head. "This isn't about her anymore. It's about respect. If she wins this fight, then every fence post I've set, every inch of this land means nothing. I won't let that happen." He stood at his porch rail, staring out at the gate in the twilight. The spikes were reset, covered neatly again with gravel. The steel bracing stood firm, gleaming faintly in the last rays of the sun. Judith might have lost her tires, but Roland knew she wasn't done. She was too proud, too vindictive. She would come back. Maybe with words, maybe with lawsuits, maybe with more. But Roland was ready. For the first time in months, he wasn't the one chasing the problem. He was waiting for it. It didn't take long. Just as Roland expected, Judith came back. Not with an apology, not with humility, but with more fire than ever. It was a Wednesday evening when he heard the sound of her SUV creeping up the county road. The replacement set of tires glistened, fresh from the shop, and she drove slower this time, cautious but determined. Roland sat on the porch, arms crossed, waiting. She stopped in front of the gate and got out, slamming the door harder than she needed to. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt, but she didn't care. She marched straight toward the fence line, her voice sharp. "Roland Keaton! You think you're clever, don't you?" Roland stood, walking down the steps to meet her halfway. His boots crunched against the gravel, slow and steady. "I think I'm tired of being ignored." She planted her hands on her hips. "You could have killed me with those spikes." He shook his head. "They weren't meant for you. They were meant for anyone who thought they could force their way through my land. You just happened to be the one who kept doing it." Her laugh was bitter, mocking. "You think the law is going to see it that way? I've already spoken with my attorney. You'll be lucky if they don't fine you into the ground." Roland's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I don't care how many lawyers you call. You broke through my gate. You broke the law. And everybody knows it." Judith stepped closer, her face inches from his. "Everybody knows what I tell them, and I've told them you're dangerous, that you're obsessed, that you're trying to intimidate me." Roland's jaw tightened. "No, Judith. I'm trying to stop you. That's all." For a moment, the two stood locked in silence, the tension thick in the evening air. Then Judith smirked and pulled out her phone, snapping a photo of him standing near the gate. "This is all the proof I need," she said coolly. "You standing here, confronting me again, harassing me." Roland sighed heavily. "Take all the pictures you want. Truth doesn't change just because you tell it different." She raised her eyebrows. "We'll see about that." Before she could turn away, Roland pointed at the ruined grooves in the gravel where her SUV had been stranded days before. "That road doesn't belong to you. If you try it again, you'll get the same result. And next time, I won't even bother coming out to watch." Judith's mouth opened like she wanted to spit fire, but no words came. She simply glared at him, eyes narrowing, then stormed back to her SUV. The door slammed again, echoing across the pasture. Roland stayed rooted to the ground, watching her drive away. She didn't test the gate this time, not with the spikes waiting underneath, but the way her tires spun kicking up dirt told him she was far from finished. That night, as Roland sat on the porch, Eddie stopped by again. He leaned on the railing, watching the gate with him. "She's not going to quit," Eddie said. Roland rubbed his hands together. "No, she's too proud. But neither am I." Eddie gave him a side glance. "What happens if she pushes harder?" "Court case. Deputies showing up more often? You ready for that?" Roland nodded slowly. "I've been ready. This land's worth more than peace with her. It's worth more than what folks whisper in town. If I don't stand up now, then it's like my father's work meant nothing." Eddie sighed, shaking his head. "You're a stubborn man, Keaton. But maybe stubborn's what it takes." The following weekend, Judith proved Eddie right. Roland was out mending fence posts along the southern pasture when he noticed a small gathering near his gate. At least 4 SUVs were parked outside the subdivision entrance, and Judith stood at the center, gesturing wildly as she spoke to her little audience. Cell phones were out, recording. Roland approached slowly, wiping sweat from his brow. "What's all this?" he asked, voice even. Judith turned with a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "A neighborhood safety meeting. Folks deserve to know there's a maniac setting traps on his land, don't they?" Murmurs rippled through the group. Roland kept his composure, even as the cameras turned on him. "My land," he said clearly, his voice carrying. "My right to protect it. I've said it 100 times and I'll say it again. She wasn't invited. None of you are. You want a shortcut, you'll find another road, because this one ends here." The crowd exchanged glances, uncertain. Judith pressed her lips into a smile, clearly pleased at the spectacle. But for once, Roland didn't care about winning the crowd. He cared about the line being drawn. But as he walked back toward his ranch house, Roland knew the fight had shifted. This wasn't about one woman anymore. This was about every eye in town watching to see who would give in first. The trap had stopped Judith's SUV, but it hadn't stopped her campaign. If anything, it poured gasoline on her fire. Within a week, The story had spread from the diner to the grocery store, from church pews to rodeo bleachers. Everyone had heard some version of it. Roland Keaton, the rancher who laid down spikes like he was guarding Fort Knox. Some said he'd gone too far. Others muttered he'd finally done what they wished they had the guts to do themselves. Either way, his name was on everyone's tongue. The first official knock came on a Friday morning. Deputy Rowden again, this time with a second officer standing behind him. "Roland," Rowden said carefully. "There's been a formal complaint filed. HOA board's pushing for an injunction. They want the spikes gone." Roland leaned on the porch post, arms crossed. "Did they mention she trespassed? That she broke my gate more times than I can count?" Rowden nodded slowly. "It's in there. But they're framing it as you setting a dangerous trap. If a kid on a dirt bike rolled through, or another driver turned down here by mistake, they'd say you were liable." Roland's jaw tightened. "A kid on a dirt bike wouldn't have forced my gate open with a luxury SUV. Judith did. She knew what she was doing." The younger officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Rowden. "Sir, all we're saying is this isn't going away quietly." Roland gave a sharp nod. "Neither am I." After they left, Roland walked the fence line for hours, thinking. The trap had worked, but it had also painted a target on his back. Judith wasn't just trying to win a shortcut anymore, she was trying to ruin him. That weekend, at church, the tension was palpable. A few folks still shook his hand, but others avoided eye contact altogether. During coffee hour, he overheard two men debating. "He's reckless. Could have gotten someone killed. Or maybe she got what she deserved. Folks got to learn you can't push a man forever." Roland pretended not to hear, but the words followed him out the door. By Monday, Judith had escalated again. She called a meeting at the subdivision clubhouse and invited local press. Roland didn't attend, but Eddie stopped by later with a grim look. "She stood up there with pictures of her car. Told everybody you're dangerous, said you're turning the whole county road into a war zone." Roland's face hardened. "Did anyone speak against her?" Eddie hesitated. "A couple, but most just listened." "Cameras were rolling, Roland. This isn't just town gossip anymore. She's trying to drag your name into headlines." That night, Roland sat alone on his porch with the cicadas screaming in the distance. He thought about his grandfather's calloused hands, about the sweat that had built every fence post on that land. He thought about his father teaching him that boundaries matter, because without them, a man has nothing to stand on. He muttered to himself, "I won't let her erase that. Not for me. Not for them." But the pressure was closing in. A letter arrived by midweek, a notice from a lawyer representing the HOA. It demanded the immediate removal of the tire spikes, calling them hazardous devices and threatening civil action. Roland crumpled it in his fist. The next evening, Judith showed up again, not to trespass, but to taunt. She parked just outside the gate, stepped out and raised her phone like she was documenting everything. "You won't win this, Roland," she called, her voice cutting through the twilight. "You can hide behind your fence, but the law's on my side." Roland walked to the gate, gripping the steel bars. "The law's on the side of the man who owns the land." "You can twist stories, but you can't change that," she smirked. "We'll see what the judge thinks." Then she got back in her SUV and drove off, tires spitting gravel. The confrontation left Roland restless. That night, sleep wouldn't come. He paced his living room, replaying the months of trespassing, the laughter at the rodeo, the whispers at the diner. He had drawn a line in the dirt, and now the whole town was watching to see if he would hold it. When dawn finally broke, Roland stood at his porch rail with his coffee, staring out at the land he'd sworn to protect. The fields stretched wide, golden in the morning light, silent witnesses to the fight that had consumed his life. He whispered, almost like a prayer, "I won't bend. Not now. Not ever." But he also knew the final reckoning was near, and it would come not from tire spikes, but from the courtroom, where the truth would be tested under harsher light. The courthouse in Parker County wasn't grand or imposing. It was a squat, brick building with double doors that had seen decades of disputes, land deeds, family quarrels, contract battles. But for Roland Keaton, walking up those steps felt heavier than any work he'd done on the ranch. Inside, The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Judith was already there, sitting tall at a table with her lawyer in a sharp grey suit. She wore her confidence like armor, flashing him the same smug smile she'd worn the day she first rolled across his pasture road. Roland sat opposite, his calloused hands folded on the table. He didn't have an expensive lawyer, just an old family attorney named Gerald Yates, a man who had represented ranchers for decades. Gerald leaned close, speaking softly. "Remember, Roland, stick to the truth. That's all you need." When the judge entered, the room quieted. The hearing wasn't criminal, just a civil dispute. But to Roland, it felt like a fight for his family's name. Judith's lawyer stood first, voice smooth and polished. "Your Honor, what we have here is reckless endangerment. My client was subjected to a deliberately hidden hazard, tire spikes, placed by Mr. Keaton. This device could have caused serious injury or death, had conditions been different. It is our contention that his actions were not only extreme, but dangerous to the entire community." Judith nodded vigorously, dabbing at her eye with a tissue, like she was the victim of something far worse than flat tires. Gerald rose next, his voice slow and measured. "Your Honor, this case is not about danger. It's about respect for property. My client warned Ms. Cranford repeatedly. He documented her trespassing. He repaired his gate, only for it to be forced open again and again. He reached out to the HOA. He reached out to her directly. Every attempt was ignored. My client did not set a trap to harm. He reinforced his gate and protected his land from repeated intrusion. That is his right under Texas law." The judge listened quietly, eyes flicking between the two sides. When it was Roland's turn to speak, he stood slowly. His boots echoed against the floor as he addressed the bench. "Your Honor, I'm no man of fancy words. I've lived on that land my whole life, my father before me, my grandfather before him. We built it, worked it, and respected it, and I asked her again and again to do the same. She didn't listen. She laughed. She bragged about tearing through what wasn't hers. I didn't build those spikes to hurt her. I built them to stop her from breaking what generations of my family worked for." The courtroom was quiet. Even Judith looked caught off guard by the steady conviction in his voice. The judge leaned forward. "Miss Cranford, did you repeatedly drive through Mr. Keaton's property after being told not to?" Judith hesitated. Her lawyer whispered something, but the judge pressed again. "Yes," she admitted finally, her voice clipped. "But it wasn't—" "That's enough," the judge interrupted. "You knowingly trespassed. This court does not condone hidden hazards, but neither can we ignore repeated violations of property rights. Mr. Keaton, you are ordered to remove the spikes as they present an ongoing risk. However, Ms. Cranford, you are hereby forbidden from entering his land without express permission. Any further violation will be considered criminal trespass. This case is closed." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Judith's face reddened, lips pressed tight as she gathered her things. Her lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, but the victory she expected had slipped away. Roland watched her leave, shoulders stiff, her pride bruised more than her tires ever were. Outside, Eddie was waiting by the truck. "How'd it go?" he asked. Roland allowed himself the faintest smile. "Judge made me pull the spikes, but she's banned from setting one foot on my land. That's what matters." Eddie slapped him on the shoulder. "Then you won." As they drove back toward the ranch, the sun hung low, casting the fields in golden light. Roland gazed out at the land, his land, and felt the weight in his chest ease for the first time in months. The fight wasn't about spikes, or even the gate. It was about proving that boundaries mattered, even when the world tried to tell you otherwise. Later that evening, Roland sat on his porch with his coffee, watching the cattle graze in the distance. He thought about the judge's words, about Judith's face when she was forced to admit the truth. And he thought about his father, who'd taught him that a man's worth was measured by the lines he refused to let others cross. He raised his cup slightly, as if in a quiet toast. "We kept it, Dad. We kept it ours." The cicadas sang their nightly chorus, and the land stretched out wide and untouchable once again. Respect wasn't given freely. It was earned, and sometimes it had to be fought for. Roland had learned the hard way, but he hadn't bent, and he hadn't broken. And maybe that was the lesson all along, that boundaries, whether fences on a ranch or principles in life, only matter if you have the courage to defend them. So if you've been watching this story, ask yourself, what's the line you won't let anyone cross? Because in the end, protecting it might just define who you are. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that make us think, challenge us, and remind us of the power of standing firm.